Hi, welcome to today's webinar, Self-Help and How-To Books. Write the one they can't stop talking about. My name is Kim Brittingham, and I'm the principal of Kim Brittingham and Company Content Development. I'm also the author of 2 books, Write That Memoir Right Now, published by Blackstone, and Read My Hips, a body image memoir published by Random House. Most of you are probably here because you're planning to write a self-help or how-to book, or maybe you're already writing it. So first, I'd just like to congratulate you. You're taking an exciting and admirable step because you're sharing your wisdom with others so they can benefit from what you know, and I think that's great. I genuinely want you to be successful. Yes, I'm one of those sappy people who really does love to see others do well, and I think there's room enough in the universe for everyone to have their dream. Self-help and how-to books aren't the kind of books you write and then put away in a drawer where no one will ever see them. They're meant to have an effect on other people's lives. And in order to be successful with that, there are 3 major tasks that you as an author must undertake. First, you have to write the book, and that's a pretty big job in itself. But then you have to convince people to read your book, and that's where marketing and platform building come in. But your efforts can't stop there. If you really want to touch as many lives as possible, you have to get your readers talking about your book. Now, I don't know how old you are, but maybe you're old enough to remember those Fabergé shampoo commercials from the 80s. Now, for those of you who don't remember, if you wouldn't mind indulging me for just a moment while I play a commercial.
To win $20,000.
When I first tried Fabergé organic shampoo with pure wheat germ oil and honey, it was so good I told 2 friends about it, and they told 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. And believe me, there's still nothing like the original Fabergé organic. It gives you super shine, super body,
And super fresh smelling hair.
Try it, and you'll tell your friends about it, and they'll tell their friends, and so on, and so on. Be sure and get the original Fabergé organic shampoo and conditioner with pure wheat germ oil and honey.
Okay, so why did I just make you sit through an old shampoo commercial? To help illustrate a point. If someone reads your book and feels okay about it, they may not bother mentioning it. But if your reader gets really excited about your book, she'll probably tell a friend or 2. If those 2 friends get just as excited, they'll probably tell 2 of their friends, and so on and so on. So you can see how your fan base can grow exponentially through word of mouth. And in these days of social media, it's easier than ever to share. So getting people to tell others about your book may seem like a step you take after the book is written. But actually, much of what will make your book unforgettable and shareable is created during the writing stage. You just have to know what you can do now to make your book a bigger hit later. In my business, I specialize in working with thought leaders and experts, so my clients bring me a lot of self-help and how-to related material. Most of the time, I see really good material that teaches a valuable lesson or imparts life-changing wisdom. Unfortunately, some of the best insights can still get lost behind ineffective writing. So today I'm going to share with you 3 common mistakes that I see authors making with self-help or how-to manuscripts, and I'm going to share some advice on how you can avoid those same slip-ups and wind up with a much stronger manuscript that's more likely to have an impact on your readership. Now, you're probably already aware that your book will be competing for attention with many other books. Now, to get an idea of just how many, the United Nations organization UNESCO says that every year approximately 2,200,000 new books are published. And those books are sharing shelf space with the 2 million books released last year, and the 2 million released the year before that, and so on and so on. Now, I'm not telling you this to discourage you. Instead, I want to encourage you to write the best book possible so you can break through the noise and be heard, and that's what this webinar is all about. So what about those 3 big mistakes to avoid? Let's look at number 1. a failure to define terms. Now, what do I mean by that? You're writing this book because you know about something that other people don't. But sometimes your intimacy with your subject can get in the way of teaching a clear lesson. Because you know your stuff so well, you forget that we, your readers, don't. So here's an example. Let's say you're a computer guy and you're writing a beginner's manual for senior citizens on how to use the internet. Sounds like a great idea. If you were to start your book with the instruction, first open your browser, I'd have to stop you right there. You know what a browser is, but a person who's never used a computer before might not. You're barely out of the gate and you're already frustrating your reader. Just think about it. Have you ever read instructions that sound like this? It's easy. Just insert the widget into the Connectigazoink. Meanwhile, you're sitting there saying, great, yeah, real easy, but what's a Connectigazoink? It's really easy to make this mistake when you have lots of knowledge and experience. The fancy jargon is part of your everyday vocabulary, and you don't really think about it. But it could make your reader want to throw your book across the room. So here's what to do. Have someone who doesn't know anything about your subject read your manuscript. Ask them to help you identify places where you've taken the reader's understanding for granted. You may think this advice only applies to how-to books, but it happens in self-help too. I recently read a self-published self-help book, and within the first couple of pages, the author threw me for a loop. She told me to call upon my peak memory. Now, I had never heard the term peak memory before. It turns out it was a term she invented to explain part of her healing process, but she forgot to tell her reader about it. Without fully understanding what that term meant, I felt like I was missing out on something. So on to common mistake number 2, sharing lots of examples and anecdotes, but none of your own. Most writers I work with already understand that their writing will be clearer and more convincing if they include stories or case studies to illustrate their points. Too often, though, I see manuscripts peppered with other people's stories, but no reference to the author's own experience. When you're giving advice, it's important that you establish your authority. As your readers, we want to know why we should take this advice from you. How did you come to learn so much about this? We need to know that you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, we won't fully buy into your message. We want to know that you've been there, done that. So let's say you're writing a book about how to use the law of attraction to get a job. As readers, we want to know that you have successfully attracted a job. Or if you're writing about surviving divorce, we need to know that you've been in the trenches and crawled out alive. Here's what to do. Tell us your stories. Let us into your world. By doing so, you'll be establishing intimacy and trust. That's what we as readers need if we're going to let you be a mentor to us. Share your stupid mistakes, your moments of terror, pratfalls, revelations, and triumphs. These are the human details that help us connect with you. Without that sense of connection, it's kind of like taking advice from a robot. It's impersonal. It lacks emotion. But when we feel a connection with you, we're more likely to share that experience with people we know and love. That's the kind of book that gets talked about. Okay, so on to misstep number 3, using a too formal tone and big words. Now, I don't blame anyone for wanting to sound intelligent. I'd rather not look like an idiot myself. However, trying too hard to sound smart in your writing can be a giant mistake, and here's why. When humans read, we hear the words in our heads. Think about the experience of reading for just a moment. As your eyes move across the type on a book page, it's almost like the author is speaking inside your brain, right? Now, we assign the author a voice, and it's almost like hearing her read to us in the privacy of our mind. Remember that when you're writing. Imagine you're sitting on a park bench with your reader. In that setting, would you speak formally and break out your big vocabulary? Well, maybe you would, but you might put your friend to sleep. You'd be boring. But not just boring, you'd also be difficult to listen to. Instead of simply hearing your story, your listener would have to work harder to understand you and maybe listen more closely than they would if you were using everyday language. Here's what to do. Use a conversational tone when writing your self-help or how-to book. In other words, write the way you'd speak, naturally. And if that feels like you're dumbing things down, keep in mind it's actually the smart thing to do, because you're allowing your reader to relax and simply take in your words. A relaxed mind is more receptive to new information. If you're trying to persuade your reader to think, feel, or behave differently in some area of life, then their relaxed brain will be more suggestible and you're more likely to have the impact you want. Did you ever notice when you're reading something really good, it almost puts you into a trance? It's almost like you get lost and the room around you disappears. It's kind of nice. But what happens when we use complex language and big or uncommon terms in our writing? We yank the reader out of her trance. Suddenly she's back in her living room wondering, what does paronymus mean? When you're writing, it sometimes helps to imagine yourself sitting across a cafe table from a friendly, curious face. In your imagination, explain the contents of your book to that person and type what you hear yourself saying. If your words feel awkward or unnatural in any way, that's a sign that your words need work. Okay, so let's review. When a reader picks up your book for the first time, you're a complete stranger to him. And it's important that you make a connection quickly so you can create the intimacy, trust, and receptiveness you need to make a lasting impression. So how can you do that? First, by talking to him in a language he understands. For you, that means going back to the very beginning of your experience and remembering what it was like when you still knew nothing. Also, assume nothing. Your book may be your reader's first introduction to your subject. So be careful not to take it for granted that your reader knows what you're talking about, especially when you're laying out steps or using special terminology. Be honest and open, and don't be afraid to share your vulnerabilities and mistakes. This lets us know you've been where we are, and that we can trust your advice. You haven't always been an expert. You learned through experience, and we need to see that. And make it easy for us to hear you. As you write, consider what you must sound like in the reader's head. Keep your tone informal and your word choices more down to earth. Follow these guidelines and you'll greatly increase your chances of writing a book that resonates so much with your reader that she'll want to tell everyone she knows about it. Thanks so much for listening to today's webinar. Good luck, and if you'd like to contact me, you can do so through my website, kimwrites.com.